Ancient engineers built warehouses that would stump modern builders. We often think of the past as primitive, but thousands of years ago, civilizations mastered preservation and logistics on a staggering scale. This video uncovers 21 ancient storage systems so complex they rival our own. You will discover how subterranean grain silos fed entire empires and labyrinthine libraries protected priceless knowledge. We will explore how these forgotten technologies achieved a level of efficiency that still inspires awe today. How did they keep ice frozen in the desert? And what secret allowed a single fortress to withstand a siege for years? By the end, your entire view of historical innovation will be transformed. What does it truly mean to build something that lasts? A master builder in Mesopotamia would have felt the earth itself. He did not see a barren landscape but a living system, reading the subtle slopes of the land for water drainage and the composition of the soil for its natural cooling properties. This was not architecture imposed upon the world, but one woven directly into it. The genius of these early systems lay in their specificity. A chamber designed for grain was fundamentally different from one built for wine or sacred scrolls. Each commodity demanded its own environment, a delicate balance of temperature and humidity that ancient engineers learned to manipulate with astonishing precision. They discovered that certain clays actually pull moisture from the air, making them perfect linings for grain pits to prevent rot. They learned that thick layers of straw and stone could create a stable, cool temperature underground, even as the desert sun blazed overhead. This was a calculated science, as evidenced by the meticulous clay tablets of the Mycenaean palaces. These were not simple inventories. They were complex records detailing quantities, dates, and expected yields, proving that storage was the very heartbeat of their economy. What truly separated a simple cellar from an empire-sustaining granary was this holistic understanding. It was the difference between just having a space and creating a living, breathing system that worked in harmony with natural forces. This foundational wisdom, this deep integration of knowledge and material, is the first secret we must grasp before stepping into the shadows of these ancient wonders. That deep understanding of earth and air found its ultimate expression in a structure that defied the desert itself. In the heart of ancient Persia, under a relentless sun, engineers built mountains of coolness. The Yakhchāl, or ice pit, was not a mere cellar but a monumental feat of architectural thermodynamics. Its secret began with its skin, a unique mortar known as saruj. This was no ordinary plaster. Craftsmen mixed sand, clay, egg whites, and other ingredients to create a substance that acted as a powerful insulator, fiercely resisting the scorching heat. The Yakhchāl rose from the plains as a massive domed tower, its white exterior reflecting sunlight while its thick walls barred heat from entering. But the true genius lay in the system that filled it. Engineers tapped into qanats, the vast networks of underground canals that brought water from the mountains. During the cold winter nights, this water was channeled into shallow, shaded pools where it would freeze. Workers would then harvest the ice, cutting it into blocks that were transported into the Yakhchāl's deep, subterranean storage chamber. This was not the end of the process. It was only the beginning of preservation. The structure's design actively fought against the environment to keep the ice solid. At the top, a wind catcher or badger captured even the faintest breeze. This tower funneled cool air down into the chamber below, while the conical shape of the dome allowed warmer air to naturally rise and escape. This created a continuous cycle of refrigeration, a perfectly balanced system that could maintain temperatures below freezing even when the world outside baked at over 40 degrees Celsius. This was not a luxury reserved for kings and queens. The scale of many Yakhchāls suggests they served entire communities, preserving food and even producing chilled delicacies for the public. It was a form of social infrastructure, a public utility built with a sophistication that modern science would not formalize for centuries. The builders of the Yakhchāl did not have the word thermodynamics, but they possessed a masterful, intuitive grasp of its principles. They understood heat transfer, convection currents, and evaporative cooling, turning theory into stone and mortar. This was not magic, it was applied science on a grand scale, setting a standard of ingenuity that our very first entry makes clear was anything but primitive. That mastery of cold in Persia finds a powerful echo in the very different world of Bronze Age Greece. Here, wealth was not measured in ice, but in liquid gold. The true currency of Mycenaean power was olive oil. Deep within the fortified citadel of Mycenae, beneath the weight of massive stone walls, lay the state's beating heart. These were the magazines, vast subterranean galleries that served as the central bank for an entire civilization. To step into one was to enter a forest of clay. Enormous ceramic jars called pithoi, some taller than a person and wide enough to hold a small bathtub of liquid, stood in precise rows. Each one was a treasure chest, filled not with coins but with hundreds of liters of oil, wine, or grain. The sheer scale was breathtaking. This was not a haphazard collection of supplies, it was a meticulously engineered storage machine. The floors were not flat. Ancient builders sloped them gently, cutting clever drainage channels into the stone to manage any accidental spills and to control the humidity that could spoil the precious contents. This attention to detail reveals a profound understanding of preservation. But the real complexity was not just in the architecture, it was in the administration. We know this because of the clay tablets they left behind, inscribed with a script called Linear B. These are not epic poems, they are inventory lists. They record, in stunning detail, the exact number of jars, their contents, the names of the officials who oversaw them, and even the expected yields from distant farms. One tablet might note that a specific official, let's say Khoriti, was responsible for 10 pithoi of oil in the Western magazine, due for distribution to the coastal garrison next month. This was a bureaucracy of abundance. The palace was not just a royal home, it was a central logistical hub that predicted need, collected surplus, and redistributed goods across the kingdom. Can you picture the flow of information, runners bringing tallies from the fields, scribes etching the numbers into wet clay, and commanders receiving their allocated rations based on those precise records? This level of organization for bulk storage indicates an economy so centralized and complex that any modern supply chain manager would look upon it with a nod of recognition. The Mycenaeans understood that to control an empire, you first had to master the ledger. That meticulous record-keeping in Mycenaean palaces evolved into something far grander and more systematic, a logistical network that powered the ancient world's greatest empire. The sheer scale of Rome demanded more than just a few storage rooms. It required an industrial solution. This was the Horrea, a warehouse so advanced its principles are still studied by engineers today. These structures were the vital organs of the empire, pumping grain, oil, and wine to the heart of Rome and its legions stationed on distant frontiers. They were strategically placed at the empire's key pressure points, rising beside the bustling port of Ostia and lining the major highways that stretched from Britain to Syria. To walk into one was to witness Roman engineering at its most pragmatic and brilliant. The floor beneath your feet would not be solid stone. It was suspended, held up by a grid of small pillars called pili, creating a hidden cavity of air that circulated constantly. This simple yet profound innovation, the suspensory, was a masterstroke. It acted as a permanent barrier against the dampness that could ruin entire harvests and a formidable defense against rats and insects. The walls were massively thick, with only a few high, small windows, creating a stable, cool, and dark environment perfect for long-term preservation. Within these cavernous spaces, the wealth of an empire was stacked to the ceilings. There was grain from the fertile fields of Egypt and North Africa, the annual shipment that kept Rome's million citizens from famine. But it did not stop there. Amphorae filled with olive oil from Spain, jars of prized garum fish sauce, vast quantities of wine, and even blocks of precious marble all found a home in the Horrea. The state-owned Horrea Publica were run with the discipline of a military campaign. Every amphora, every sack of grain was logged in detailed ledgers, tracked from its origin to its final distribution. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Consider the Horrea Galbi complex in Rome, which covered an area of over 20,000 square meters, a footprint larger than many modern shopping centers. This was not just storage, it was the ancient world's version of a globalized supply chain. The existence of this network meant that a soldier on Hadrian's Wall could eat bread made from Egyptian grain, and a citizen in Rome could flavor their food with Spanish oil. It was this guaranteed flow of goods that created the stability and comfort which defined Roman life for centuries. The Horreum was the unsung hero of the Pax Romana, a silent, steady engine that made the empire possible. While the Roman Horreum was a monument to imperial power, another civilization mastered storage by embracing the opposite strategy, invisibility. High in the sun-baked canyons of the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans did not build warehouses. They wove them into the very fabric of the cliffs. Their granaries were not meant to be seen. Tucked into impossibly high crevices and sheltered beneath massive sandstone overhangs, these small, sealed chambers were a masterclass in defensive preservation. For them, storing food was a direct act of survival. Using expert stone masonry, they constructed rooms that were perfectly integrated into the cliff face, their walls blending seamlessly with the natural rock. Inside, they safeguarded the vital triad of their diet: maize, beans, and squash. The location was a calculated defense against every conceivable threat. The sheer height deterred animals and raiding parties, while the stone itself created a natural cooler, shielding the precious seeds from the desert heat. The overhanging cliff acted as a giant roof, protecting the stores from rain and snow. At a place like Cliff Palace in Mesa Verde, you can see the entire community strategy laid bare. Hundreds of these storage rooms are built directly into the dwelling complexes. A family's living space was just a few steps away from their year's supply of food. This was not a public distribution system like Rome's, but a deeply personal and communal form of security. The architecture of storage was the architecture of survival. It allowed these communities to endure the harsh winters and the unpredictable droughts that could last for years. Their genius was in understanding that the best way to protect their wealth was not to flaunt it in a grand building, but to hide it in the shadows of the canyon walls, making the landscape itself their greatest ally. This link between storage and sovereignty becomes terrifyingly clear at the ancient city of Megiddo. Guarding a vital mountain pass on the Via Maris, the great international highway, Megiddo was a prize fought over for millennia. Its rulers knew that control of this crossroads meant nothing if they could not outlast a siege. Their solution was carved into the very foundations of the city. Beneath the royal courtyard, workers painstakingly chiseled down through 20 feet of solid limestone, not to build a tomb, but to create a fortress for food. They did not dig simple pits. They sculpted a series of colossal, bottle-shaped silos, each one a perfect vertical cylinder that narrowed to a secure opening at the top. The scale was staggering. This complex of just a few silos had a combined capacity estimated to hold over 1,300 cubic meters of grain. That is enough to feed a population of several thousand people for many years. Imagine the logistics of its operation. In a central courtyard, workers would pour the harvested grain down through the narrow openings. The sheer depth and the insulating properties of the bedrock itself created a naturally cool and dry environment, protecting the precious stores from rot and pests. When the kingdom needed to eat, they would simply open a small door at the base of each silo and let the grain flow out. This was not a seasonal cache, it was a strategic national reserve. The construction itself was a monumental undertaking. Using nothing but bronze and iron chisels, teams of laborers had to quarry out thousands of tons of rock, achieving a smooth, uniform shape that prevented grain from getting stuck in corners. The precision speaks of a state with immense resources and a singular, long-term vision. The grain silos of Megiddo were a statement carved in stone. They declared that this city would not fall to hunger. It was a declaration of independence through sheer logistical brilliance, proving that the most powerful weapon in an ancient ruler's arsenal was not a sword, but a full granary. If controlling the flow of grain and oil was the key to political power, then the Library of Alexandria sought to command an even more vital resource: knowledge. Here, the commodity was not something you could eat or drink, but ideas themselves, preserved on the most fragile of mediums. Papyrus scrolls and delicate parchment manuscripts were vulnerable to everything from the damp sea air to the voracious appetite of insects. Storing them required a different kind of genius, one focused not on bulk but on precision. The solution was the Bibliotheca, a building designed specifically as a fortress for the written word. This was not a temple with a few shelves of scrolls. It was the ancient world's first great research institution, and its storage system was its core innovation. Each scroll was a precious object, carefully rolled and stored in a protective cylindrical case called a capsa. These cases, often made of wood or leather, were then organized on rows of shelves known as pigeonholes, a system that kept them safe, upright, and accessible. But the building itself was the true marvel. While its exact blueprint is lost to history, accounts suggest the architects considered factors a modern librarian would recognize. They designed for controlled light, likely using high windows to illuminate reading areas without allowing direct sunlight to fade and brittle the precious inks. They would have needed clever ventilation to combat the humid Mediterranean climate, a silent enemy that could encourage mold and destroy an entire collection. The very organization of this vast repository hinted at a system more complex than we might assume. There are indications that the library's founder, Demetrius of Phaleron, proposed a system of categorization by subject and author, a foundational principle of modern library science. This was a warehouse of ideas managed by a dedicated staff of scholars who not only preserved the scrolls but also copied, translated, and critiqued them. The loss of the Library of Alexandria is a tragedy precisely because it underscores a profound truth. Preserving knowledge is a technological challenge as demanding as preserving grain. It requires architecture, organization, and constant vigilant care. A single spark or a change in the wind could erase centuries of human thought, making the library's storage system one of the most delicate and ambitious ever conceived. The challenge of preserving fragile knowledge in Alexandria finds a parallel in a civilization that mastered preservation on an epic, mountainous scale. The Inca Empire did not simply build storehouses, they engineered an entire landscape into a supply network. Their secret was the Qullqa, a system so effective it transformed the Andes Mountains from a barrier into the empire's greatest warehouse. These were not hidden cellars or grand urban complexes, but thousands of unassuming stone buildings dotting the ridges and hillsides along the royal road. The location of every single Qullqa was a stroke of genius. By building them on high slopes, Inca engineers harnessed the natural environment as a refrigeration system. The higher altitude meant cooler temperatures year-round, and the constant mountain winds sweeping through their strategically placed ventilation ducts kept the contents dry and free from rot. Each structure, whether circular or rectangular, was built with precise stone masonry, creating a stable, temperature-controlled environment high above the valleys. But the true complexity was not in any single building, it was in the network. Qullqas were positioned almost like pit stops along a modern highway, spaced roughly a day's journey apart. This meant an Inca army on the move, or a Chasqui messenger running at high altitude, could travel across thousands of miles of rugged terrain without having to carry heavy supplies. They would simply arrive at the next way station and draw exactly what they needed from the local Qullqa. The variety of goods stored within was staggering. There were vast quantities of chuño, potatoes freeze-dried through a process of repeated freezing and thawing in the mountain air, which could last for years. There was maize, dried meat, military equipment like slings and spears, fine textiles, and ceremonial items like coca leaves. This was the material wealth of the state, meticulously managed without a written word. Instead, administrators used the quipu, a complex device of knotted strings that recorded quantities, dates, and types of goods. This system allowed the Inca state to act with incredible efficiency. In times of local crop failure, supplies could be rushed from a neighboring region's Qullqas to prevent famine. When a massive project like a new temple or road was commissioned, the state could mobilize the labor force by guaranteeing their food and tools from these strategic reserves. The Qullqas were the physical nodes of an information and supply web that bound the empire together, proving that the most complex storage system is not always a single building, but an idea woven into the very geography of power. This same principle of survival architecture reached its absolute zenith not in a single building, but in an entire city turned upside down. The underground world of Derinkuyu was a labyrinth of necessity carved from soft volcanic rock. Here, storage was not merely a function, it was a fundamental pillar of existence. When invaders swept across the plains of Cappadocia, entire communities could vanish beneath the earth, descending as deep as 18 stories into a self-contained universe. The true marvel of this subterranean refuge was not just its capacity to hide people, but its ability to sustain them for months on end. Deep within the maze of living quarters, churches, and stables, engineers designed specialized food storage chambers. These were not dark, damp corners. They were carefully positioned to take advantage of the Earth's natural insulation, maintaining a remarkably stable and cool temperature year-round. The air was kept fresh by a network of ventilation shafts that reached all the way to the surface, invisible from the outside world. These shafts did more than just provide breathable air, they prevented condensation, ensuring that precious stores of wine, olive oil, and dried grains remained free from mold. The most ingenious feature was the massive, circular stone doors. Weighing hundreds of kilograms, these monolithic wheels could be rolled across corridors to seal off entire sections. While their primary purpose was defensive, blocking invaders from penetrating deeper, They also served a crucial storage function. By isolating different chambers, the inhabitants could create distinct microclimates. One sealed area might maintain the perfect humidity for aging wine in large clay amphorae, while another, with different ventilation, could be kept bone dry for storing legumes and grains. Deep wells tapped into underground aquifers provided a reliable water source, completing the system. This was a complete, buried ecosystem where the preservation of resources was as meticulously planned as the protection of human life. Derinkuyu stands as the ultimate expression of storage integrated into survival, proving that the most complex warehouse is one designed to keep a civilization alive while the world above falls into chaos. The need for absolute security carved a different kind of storage from the soft rock of Cappadocia. On the windswept frontier of the Roman Empire, the grain that fed legions was guarded as fiercely as any fortress wall. At Carnuntum, a key garrison on the Danube River, the military Horreum was not just a building, it was a statement of imperial power and a vital link in a chain of survival. This was storage engineered for war. Its design shared the raised floors and thick walls of its urban cousins, but every other feature was amplified for a life on the edge of hostile territory. Access was brutally controlled, with only a few heavily fortified entry points wide enough for a cart but easily defended by a handful of soldiers. The perimeter would have been under constant watch, the comings and goings of every amphora and sack of grain logged with the unyielding precision of a military ledger. Inside, the contents were the lifeblood of the frontier. Beyond the mountains of grain needed to feed thousands of men, the Horreum safeguarded the very tools of conquest. Stacked in orderly rows were spare pilum javelins, bundles of arrows, and sheets of leather for repairing shields. There were replacement parts for the massive ballistae and onagers, the siege engines that could break a wall or a charging line of warriors. Perhaps most critically, it also held the legionaries' pay, chests of coins secured in a vault-like chamber, because a hungry soldier might complain, but an unpaid soldier was a mutineer. The location itself was a masterstroke of logistics. Positioned directly on the riverbank, supplies could be unloaded from barges and marched straight into the warehouse, while major roads radiating from the camp ensured that units stationed along the limes, the border fortifications, could be resupplied quickly. This complex did not just store things, it projected stability. Its very existence meant that a legion stationed hundreds of miles from Rome could operate with the same confidence as one in Italy. Its needs anticipated and met with cold, calculated efficiency. The principles at work here, durability, security, and rapid deployment, are the very same ones that define modern military logistics, proving that when survival is on the line, the architecture of storage becomes the architecture of victory. That same obsession with military precision found its ultimate expression not on the battlefield, but in the silent, underground vaults that supplied it. Just a short distance from the awe-inspiring ranks of the Terracotta army, Chinese archaeologists made a discovery that was, in its own way, just as revolutionary. They uncovered the emperor's real armory. These were not the ceremonial weapons of clay soldiers, but the actual, functional arsenal intended for an eternal campaign. In deep, rammed earth pits lay thousands of bronze swords, spear tips, crossbows, and tens of thousands of arrowheads, all arranged with a breathtaking sense of order. This was not a tomb filled with treasure, it was a military warehouse designed for perpetual readiness. The weapons were not tossed into a heap, they were stored on carefully constructed wooden racks, organized by type and function, much like a modern armory. Each sword had its place, each crossbow was positioned for immediate access. The environmental control within these sealed chambers was so effective that when archaeologists first brushed the dust from a bronze blade, it still gleamed with a sharp edge, having resisted the corrosive effects of moisture and time for over 2,000 years. The most astonishing find was the crossbows. Their intricate trigger mechanisms, made of bronze and featuring multiple interlocking parts, were found in perfect working condition. A soldier from the Qin dynasty could have picked one up, drawn the string, and fired it without a single repair. This level of preservation was no accident. It was the result of a deeply sophisticated understanding of materials and enclosure. The vaults were designed to create a stable, dry microclimate that prevented the oxidation that would normally destroy metal. This reveals a mindset far beyond mere burial ritual. The first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, was not just preparing for the afterlife, he was institutionalizing his power for eternity. The storage of these weapons was a final, definitive act of control. It demonstrated that his authority, his military might, and his logistical genius were meant to be permanent forces in the universe. The Terracotta army gets all the attention, but the true masterpiece of Qin engineering may well be these forgotten vaults, a storage solution so perfect it defied the relentless decay of centuries. The silent perfection of the Qin armory gives way to a structure that is its complete opposite, a monument not to secrecy but to community, and to the most vital resource of all. In the dry plains of India, the Stepwells stand as cathedrals carved into the earth. Chand Bayori is not merely a hole in the ground, it is an inverted pyramid of breathtaking geometry, a staircase to the water table consisting of over 3,500 steps descending 13 stories down. This was storage engineered on a grand, almost theatrical scale, but its true complexity lay in its multi-layered purpose. The sheer depth of the structure was its first ingenious feature. By plunging far below the surface, the builders created a massive reservoir shielded from the relentless sun. The towering walls and the labyrinth of steps cast deep, cooling shadows across the water's surface, drastically reducing evaporation and keeping the supply fresh and cool even during the hottest months. But a stepwell was far more than a refrigerator for water. It was a social hub, a temple, and a lifeline woven into one. As the seasons changed and the water level dropped during long dry spells, the intricate staircase allowed people to simply walk down to the new water line. This was an adaptive system, ensuring access year-round. The landings between flights of stairs became shaded plazas where villagers could gather, escaping the heat. Carved niches in the walls housed small shrines, transforming the daily chore of collecting water into a spiritual act. The stepwell was a bank for a currency more precious than gold, a public utility that sustained entire communities through drought and plenty. Its architecture acknowledged that storing a resource like water was not just a technical problem. It was a deeply human one, requiring a design that nurtured community while performing a logistical miracle. This was storage as a living, breathing heart of a village, where every step down was a step toward survival. That mastery of preservation for survival finds a surprising counterpart in the art of ancient luxury. In the ruins of a Canaanite palace at Tel Kabri, archaeologists brushed away centuries of soil to reveal a room that redefined the purpose of storage. This was not a grim granary or a military armory, but the oldest and largest wine cellar ever discovered in the ancient Near East. Imagine walking into a space designed not for necessity but for pure delight. 40 large ceramic jars stood in orderly rows, their combined capacity holding nearly 2,000 liters of liquid. This was not a haphazard collection. It was a curated library of vintage, a testament to a culture that had turned wine-making into a complex science. The true revelation came not from the jars themselves, but from the ghost of their contents. Using advanced residue analysis, scientists detected the chemical fingerprints left behind on the pottery. They discovered this was no ordinary wine. The vintners of Tel Kabri had created a sophisticated recipe, infusing the grape wine with a precise blend of herbs, resins, and spices. They added mint for a fresh, cooling sensation, honey to balance the natural tartness, and juniper berries to impart a piney, aromatic complexity. This was a crafted beverage, aged and enhanced within the stable, cool environment of the palace's thick-walled storage room. The location itself was crucial. Stored deep within the palace complex, the temperature would have remained remarkably constant, shielding the precious liquid from the damaging heat fluctuations that could spoil a vintage. This indicates a profound understanding of the aging process. They knew that time, under the right conditions, could transform a simple fermented drink into something truly exquisite. This cellar was more than a pantry, it was a laboratory of flavor. It proves that ancient storage was not solely about staving off hunger or preparing for war. It was also about refining pleasure, about investing knowledge and resources into the creation of something beautiful and enjoyable. The royal wine cellars of Tel Kabri show us that the drive to perfect preservation extended to the very highest echelons of culture, where the science of storage became inseparable from the art of living. The art of crafting fine wine for royal banquets depended entirely on a system of secure, stationary storage. But for the legendary Silk Road, storage had to be as mobile as the merchants themselves. Caravanserais were the nomadic warehouses that made global trade possible. Picture a lone traveler on the vast, empty steppe, seeing a fortified silhouette on the horizon as the sun sets. That was not just an inn, it was a beacon of safety and commerce. These sprawling complexes were the ancient world's fulfillment centers, designed to service the endless caravans of camels and merchants carrying silk from China, spices from India, and glassware from the Mediterranean. Their architecture followed a brilliant, standardized blueprint. A single, heavy gate led into a massive central courtyard, large enough to hold hundreds of animals. Surrounding this open space were 2 levels of rooms. The ground floor housed the camels and horses, while the upper level provided simple lodgings for the weary merchants. But the most critical feature was the ring of locked storerooms that lined the walls. Here, a merchant could securely stash his most valuable bales of silk or sacks of pepper, safe from bandits and the elements while he rested. The strategic genius of the caravanserai network was its spacing. They were built roughly a day's journey apart, about 30 kilometers, which was the maximum distance a loaded camel could travel in a single day. This created an unbroken chain of security and logistics stretching for thousands of miles. A merchant did not have to carry supplies for the entire journey. He simply had to make it to the next caravanserai. These way stations were more than just a place to sleep. They were complete service hubs. They had guards for protection, blacksmiths to repair wagons and shoe animals, and most importantly, they had reliable water sources like wells or cisterns, a priceless commodity on the arid trade routes. This system transformed storage from a static concept into a dynamic, moving part of the supply chain. Goods did not simply sit in one place, they flowed continuously across continents, pausing each night in a new, secure node. The caravanserai was the physical internet of its day, a network of waypoints that connected east and west, proving that the greatest storage system is sometimes not a single building, but a relentless, repeating idea of safety and resupply, carved into the landscape of the world. The legacy of the caravanserai was a network built for motion, but the Minoans of Crete anchored their power in a single, magnificent structure. the Palace of Knossos was not merely a royal residence, it was the vibrant, beating heart of an entire maritime economy. To walk through its storerooms was to witness a society that viewed abundance as an art form. Long, narrow corridors stretched into the distance, their walls lined with colossal ceramic jars known as pithoi. These were not simple containers, they were monumental works of craft, some standing taller than a full-grown adult and decorated with intricate rope patterns and spirals. Each one was a testament to the skill of Minoan potters, capable of holding hundreds of liters of the island's liquid wealth, olive oil, wine, and precious grains. The organization was anything but haphazard. Different magazines or storage rooms were designated for specific commodities, creating a highly specialized system. This separation was a practical necessity, preventing the scent of wine from tainting the grain and allowing for precise environmental control. The jars themselves were not simply placed on the floor. In a stroke of engineering genius, they were partially set into the ground. This embedding provided crucial stability against the tremors of earthquakes that frequently shook the island, while also leveraging the Earth's natural coolness to keep the contents at a stable, preservative temperature. But the true measure of this system's sophistication was not just in its physical design, but in its administration. Scribes maintained meticulous records on clay tablets using a script we call Linear A. Though still undeciphered, the very existence of these inventories points to a complex bureaucracy that tracked every jar, every quantity, and every transaction. The storerooms of Knossos were more than a pantry, they were a public display of prosperity. The sheer scale and the deliberate beauty of the pithoi communicated a clear message to any visitor. The lords of Knossos commanded not just power, but an overflowing, managed surplus that was the envy of the Bronze Age world. This was storage as a symbol of divine favor and economic might, where even the most utilitarian function was infused with an unmistakable aesthetic grace. The grace of Minoan palace storage stands in quiet contrast to the smaller, yet equally profound, seed caches of ancient North America. Here, the treasure was not oil or wine, but the future itself, hidden in the earth. Across the woodlands of the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys, societies like the Adena and Hopewell were mastering a different kind of complexity. Their underground pits were not grand monuments, but they held a power that would reshape the continent. These were not simple holes for hiding surplus food. They were genetic libraries, carefully designed to preserve the most promising seeds for the next spring. The chosen seeds were from plants we might consider weeds today, like sumpweed, goosefoot, and an early form of sunflower. But to these early botanists, they were the raw material of civilization. The construction of each cache was a precise science. A pit was dug and often lined with sheets of bark or a layer of specially selected clay. This lining was the key. It created a barrier, sealing the seeds away from the air and the moisture that would cause them to rot or sprout prematurely. Once filled, the pit was sealed tightly, sometimes with a stone slab or a plug of hardened clay, making it invisible and inaccessible to pests. This was not a short-term solution. It was a long-term investment in the genetic future of their crops. Over generations, by selectively saving only the seeds from the plants with the largest seeds, the most oil, or the best taste, these ancient farmers were unconsciously directing the course of evolution. They were domesticating plants right there in their storage pits. Each carefully preserved cache represented a conscious choice to favor one strain over another, slowly transforming wild, scraggly plants into reliable, productive crops. This practice required a deep, intimate knowledge of the life cycle of plants and a remarkable ability to think across seasons and years. The act of storage became the very engine of agricultural progress. It allowed for a gradual shift from a life of foraging to one of settled farming, because knowing you had a guaranteed, improved seed stock for the next planting season gave a community the confidence to put down roots. The true sophistication of these societies is measured not in the scale of their granaries, but in the foresight embedded in those small, sealed pits. They understood that the most valuable thing you can store is not just food, but potential. The transformation of a simple seed pit into a genetic treasury reveals a profound shift in how societies viewed preservation. But for the Sumerian royalty of storage was an eternal covenant. Their tombs were not places of decay, but the ultimate, impregnable vaults engineered to defy time itself. Descending into one of these subterranean chambers, you would find yourself not in a crypt, but in a meticulously prepared treasury for the afterlife. The walls were not merely earth, they were constructed with baked brick and stone, sealed with layers of waterproof bitumen, a tar-like substance that acted as a formidable barrier against the damp Mesopotamian soil. Every material was chosen not for its beauty alone, but for its enduring properties. The goal was absolute permanence. Within these sealed spaces, the wealth of a dynasty was locked away forever. There were golden helmets so finely crafted they looked like woven hair, intricate lyres adorned with the head of a bull made of lapis lazuli, and ceremonial chariots complete with the skeletons of the oxen that were meant to pull them in the next world. This was not a random collection of grave goods, it was a complete inventory for eternal rule. The tomb's architecture was a storage solution of terrifying finality. Corbelled vaults and deep shafts were designed to be filled in and hidden, severing the chamber from the world of the living with an irrevocable seal. The preservation of objects like delicate musical instruments and fragile lapis lazuli, a stone imported from thousands of miles away, demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of a stable microenvironment. By creating an airtight, watertight chamber, the Sumerian engineers achieved what all storage aspires to: they stopped the clock. This reflects a belief system where the boundary between life and death was a logistical frontier. A king's power and status had to be maintained indefinitely, requiring a storage system that was not just for years, but for millennia. The royal tombs of present a haunting truth that the most complex storage ever devised was built for a journey no one could confirm, yet was prepared for with an engineering certainty that still resonates today. The finality of the Sumerian tombs, sealed for eternity, presents a stark contrast to a system designed not for the afterlife, but for life in one of the world's most punishing landscapes. The Nazca lines etched on the surface of the Peruvian desert are famous, but the civilization's true masterpiece lies hidden beneath the burning sands. In a hyper-arid environment where rain might fall only once a decade, the Nazca engineered the Puquios, a labyrinth of underground aqueducts that performed a miraculous kind of storage. They did not build tanks to hold water, they turned the earth itself into a reservoir. Their genius was in recognizing that the real treasure was not the water you could see, but the vast, hidden groundwater trapped deep below the surface. The Puquios were a network of horizontal tunnels, gently sloped and carefully reinforced with river stones that tapped directly into these subterranean aquifers. They channeled the water across long distances, but the system's brilliance was in its dynamic function. By continuously drawing a sustainable amount of water, the Nazca were effectively storing it in the safest place imaginable, the natural aquifer, where it was protected from the relentless desert sun that would evaporate any surface pool in hours. The most distinctive feature of these aqueducts were the spiral openings that dotted the desert floor, known as ojos or eyes. These were not simple holes. Their corkscrew design was a masterstroke of practical engineering. The spirals acted as giant air vents, creating a pressure differential that actually helped pull the groundwater up through the tunnels towards the surface. They also served as access points for maintenance, allowing workers to descend and clear the tunnels of debris to keep the life-giving water flowing. This was a sustainable form of resource management that transformed a seemingly lifeless desert into patches of fertile, arable land. The Puquios did not fight the desert. They collaborated with its hidden hydrology, demonstrating that the most ingenious way to store a vital resource is sometimes to let the planet itself do the work. The silent, flowing genius of the Puquios stands in stark contrast to the bustling, noisy commerce of the Viking Age. In the great trading centers of the Norse world, storage was not hidden but proudly displayed along the waterfront, a direct testament to wealth and far-reaching connections. At places like Qullqa in Sweden and Hittite in Denmark, the shoreline was not a simple beach but a dense forest of wooden piers and long, imposing warehouses. These were not the temporary sheds of seasonal traders, but permanent, robust structures built to secure the exotic goods that fueled a continental economy. Imagine the scene: ships with their distinctive striped sails gliding into the harbor, their hulls low in the water, heavy with cargo. They were met by a line of these large, timber-framed buildings, their doors open to reveal fortunes stacked inside. The inventory of a single warehouse could read like a map of the known world. There were bundles of thick furs from the northern forests of Russia, destined to keep European nobles warm. There was raw amber, golden and translucent, hauled from the Baltic shores. Most valuable of all were the tusks of walrus, a form of ivory that was carved into exquisite chess pieces and religious objects for markets as far away as Baghdad. These warehouses were the critical pivot points in a vast supply chain. Goods arriving from the east would be unloaded, sorted, and stored securely until the next ship heading west was ready to depart. Their strategic location right on the water's edge was a masterstroke of logistics, minimizing the back-breaking labor of moving heavy cargo over land. But the sophistication did not stop at location. The buildings themselves were engineered for their damp environment. Floors were likely raised above the ground to protect against rot and flooding, and the walls, built from thick, overlapping planks, would have been designed to keep the interior dry and well ventilated, protecting precious commodities like furs from mold and insects. This system reveals a side of the Vikings often overshadowed by their reputation as raiders. They were, above all else, masterful organizers of commerce. The warehouse managers of Hittite were not just strongmen. They were accountants, tracking complex transactions in a multi-ethnic marketplace that saw Arabic silver coins exchanged for Norse ironwork. This logistical backbone allowed a single piece of walrus ivory to travel from the Arctic coasts of Norway to a workshop in Constantinople, a journey made possible by the secure, reliable storage hubs that dotted the Scandinavian coastline. The Viking longship captured the imagination, but it was the humble warehouse that truly built their empire of trade. While Viking merchants celebrated their wealth in open warehouses, the Olmecs of ancient Mexico embedded their power in stone itself. At San Lorenzo, the colossal heads are famous, but the sprawling altars carved from the same volcanic basalt present a deeper puzzle. These are not small ceremonial objects, but immense troughs, some weighing over 20 tons, with smooth, deeply concave surfaces that look like giant stone basins. Their sheer scale suggests a purpose beyond the purely symbolic. One compelling theory is that these altars were, in fact, monumental storage containers. Imagine the rainy season transforming one of these vast stone bowls into a reservoir, holding thousands of gallons of water for the community during the dry months. Or perhaps they were filled with grain or other communal supplies during great public festivals, turning the act of distribution into a powerful ritual. The logistics behind their creation are staggering. The basalt came from quarries in the Tuxtla Mountains, over 50 miles away, a journey that required moving these multi-ton blocks across rivers and through dense jungle without the wheel or draft animals. This feat alone was a staggering display of coordinated labor, a society marshalling its entire population for a single goal. If these altars did serve a storage function, then they represent a system where practicality and ideology were inseparably fused. Storing water was not a hidden, utilitarian task. It was a public spectacle carved in enduring rock. The ruler who commanded such a project was not just a manager of resources, but a figure of almost divine authority, demonstrating his power through the very monuments that sustained his people. This was storage as a permanent assertion of control, where the container itself was a masterpiece of engineering and a symbol of the collective will. The Olmecs understood that the most effective way to secure a resource was to make its vessel an object of awe. A ruler's power in Hattusa was measured not just by the height of its walls, but by the depth of its granaries. Perched on a rugged Anatolian plateau, the Hittite capital was a fortress designed for endurance, its defenses anchored by colossal, jagged cyclopean stonework. Yet the true key to its survival lay in the large, above-ground silos strategically positioned throughout the city. These were not hidden pits but proud, sturdy structures built to be seen, their thick stone walls and elevated floors a clear declaration of self-sufficiency. Each granary was a fortress within a fortress. The elevated floors, supported by stone pillars, created a critical air gap that protected the precious grain stores from ground moisture and pests, a simple yet brilliant innovation for long-term preservation. Their placement was a masterclass in urban planning. Clustered near the city gates and along the main thoroughfares, these granaries ensured that grain could be distributed quickly to the garrison manning the walls or to the populace in their neighborhoods during a prolonged siege. This was storage as a central nervous system for defense, with the grain reserves acting as the city's lifeblood. The administration of this system was just as formidable as its architecture. Cuneiform tablets recovered from the royal archives reveal a meticulous, almost obsessive state control. They record exact quantities of grain received from outlying regions, the names of the officials responsible for each silo, and detailed projections of consumption rates for the army and the citizens. This was not a suggestion, it was a command economy where food security was the ultimate strategic asset. The Hittite Empire understood that its military campaigns and its very sovereignty depended on the ability to outlast any enemy, not through valor alone, but through the cold, calculated reserve of thousands of tons of grain. In Hattusa, the granary was the most powerful weapon in the royal arsenal. Centuries before the Persian Yakhchāl rose from the desert, a parallel revolution in cold was taking shape far to the east. In the fertile valleys of the Zhou dynasty, engineers were mastering the art of refrigeration with their own sophisticated system, the ice well. This was not a towering dome but a feat of subterranean engineering, a deep pit dug into the cool earth and meticulously lined with layers of straw and timber for insulation. The annual ritual was a community effort. During the deepest cold of winter, workers would venture out to frozen rivers and lakes, cutting thick blocks of ice with saws and chisels. These crystalline slabs were then transported with great care into the waiting darkness of the ice cellar, where they were stacked like precious treasure and sealed away from the warmth of the coming seasons. The ice was a versatile tool of civilization. It preserved delicate meats and perishable fruits for the aristocratic class, allowing for a diet of surprising variety year-round. It chilled wines and ceremonial drinks, transforming a simple beverage into a luxurious experience. There is even evidence it was used for medicinal purposes, to reduce fevers or soothe inflammation. The practice was so embedded in the culture that it found its way into the Book of Songs, one of China's oldest and most revered texts, where the cutting and storing of ice is mentioned as a regular, essential part of the annual cycle. The profound implication of the Zhou ice wells is not just their technical skill, but their independent invention. Separated by vast deserts and mountain ranges from Persia, Chinese engineers arrived at a nearly identical solution to the same fundamental problem. This reveals a powerful truth about human ingenuity. The drive to preserve, to control our environment, and to improve our lives through technology is a universal constant. It emerges spontaneously across the globe wherever necessity meets creative courage. The quest for complex storage was never a single thread of history, but a tapestry woven from countless local innovations, each a brilliant response to the timeless challenge of survival. From the wind-cooled ice houses of Persia to the silent armories of the Terracotta army, we have journeyed through 21 stunning examples of ancient storage genius. These systems reveal a truth that reshapes our view of the past. Our ancestors were not primitive. They were master problem solvers who engineered solutions that were both elegant and profoundly effective. They achieved this not with overwhelming force, but with a deep, intuitive understanding of their environment. They read the landscape like a blueprint, using the Earth's own cooling properties, the constant flow of mountain air, and the insulating power of simple straw and clay. Their goal was not just to build for the present, but to create legacies of resilience that would endure for millennia. The lesson for us today is profound. In our relentless pursuit of ever more complex technology, we might look to the past for inspiration in simplicity, durability, and working in harmony with nature. These ancient warehouses are more than crumbling ruins. They are timeless blueprints for building a future that lasts. If this exploration of forgotten ingenuity has fascinated you, we would love to hear which system amazed you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the mysteries of history.